Good morning, and welcome to this meeting of the Council of the Town of Oakville. And this being a special meeting of the Council, I will ask if there are any declarations of pecuniary interest. You'd think I could pronounce that. Madam Clerk, there are none. And let's see, what else do you want? We only have one agenda item here. We have regrets from Councillor Sanju and Councillor Longo. They have day jobs, which is why we meet in the evening normally. And our item today for the special council meeting is to be updated by the Halton Regional Police Service on their work on our behalf. And we are faced this morning by the smiling faces of Superintendent Nick Milinovich and Inspector Dave Stewart. And as I said to a few people before the meeting started, Superintendent Milinovich can be thought of as the Oakville Police Chief in that he is in charge of District 2 and 2 District is Oakville in the Halton Regional Police scheme of things. I have to say that because he would never say that. Superintendent, welcome, and council and the public through the magic of the internet are looking forward to your information.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Your Worship. To begin, the first thing I would like to do is thank Your Worship and council for making time in what is obviously a very busy schedule to share some of the work that we've been involved in over the course of the last, starting with 2018. I'd like to do a review of some of the achievements and accomplishments that we've been able to meet. And then also I'd like to discuss the work plan moving into 2019. And I have to tell you that I'm incredibly excited to share details on both of those with you. I think that you'll find that some of the different activities, programs, and initiatives that we have been involved in are impressive and really are establishing the benchmark. So thank you. To begin with, a brief overview of where we plan on going with the presentation. Of course, introductions. Thank you to His Worship for my introduction. As he said, I'm responsible for district operations here in Oakville.
My name is Dave Stewart. I am the operations inspector in the town of Oakville.
And to begin with, we are going to very briefly touch upon our community safety and well-being plan in Halton. Our reason for doing so, in my mind, is obvious. Most know that we are the leaders in the area of community safety and well-being. It is now a legislated activity that municipalities and regions, certainly police services, are going to be required to undertake. But for us, it also establishes a great framework for how we can begin to apply some of those principles that we learned through community safety and well-being planning locally. And then finally, I'd like to move into 2019 and talk about how we plan on capitalizing on some of the opportunities for improvement that we've identified and continuation of programs that we think are genuinely providing us a return on investment. Of course, there's a Q&A at the end, but I would encourage anybody that has questions, please feel free. As you can see up on your screen, generally speaking, Oakville district operations are comprised of 3, not distinct areas, they work together, but 3 buckets of operations. The first being criminal investigations, or Criminal Investigations Bureau, CIB we call it. Those are the officers that investigate everything from your typical property crime all the way up to attempted murder.
I oversee uniform operations, which is frontline response. So we have 4 platoons working rotating shifts to ensure adequate coverage on the front line. Those platoons are staffed by a staff sergeant and 2 sergeants that supervise a number of patrol constables. They are supported by a district unit support team, which is a group of officers that augments their service delivery by providing enhanced staffing at times of increased operational calls for service. I also oversee the district response unit, which is a team of traffic safety specialists, which focuses on traffic initiatives, traffic programming, and dealing with traffic complaints in the town of Oakville. Also, the Community Mobilization Bureau you'll see here is a unit that is embedded within the district. They support us with regards to engaging the community, liaising with education, school boards, students, dealing with youth who are in conflict with the law, as well as helping vulnerable persons manage dealing with crime and victimization.
And very quickly, we would like to point out a few changes in staffing assignments that I think will be absolutely relevant not only to council, but also the community. Our traffic safety unit, previously Gus Bistis, who I'm sure many of you have worked with, has since been reassigned to Burlington, and Sergeant Milo Chimber will be taking his place.
And we have Sergeant Tara Vivian, who's taken over in the Community Mobilization Bureau from Sergeant Eric Van Vliet. So no doubt some of you have come across Eric at various community events, and they're tremendous community support.
And so moving into Halton's Regional Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan, as I alluded to in the beginning, this is an area where Halton is not only setting the benchmark, but we are leading innovation. We are the first region to have a community safety and well-being plan which meets all the established guidelines. And to put that in perspective, legislation requires plans to be in place by 2021. I believe the first draft plan was endorsed by our regional council in 2017. So that really gives you some good context to consider some of the success therein. That plan, it's a living document. And by that, I mean it's not something that has been prepared and placed on a shelf to collect dust. It's evolving, and it really is a delivery system of services to the people that require them most. And through that, we're able to establish a response-ready infrastructure to facilitate multi-sector collaboration, with over 50 partners having participated already. The response-ready portion for the people that are participating in community safety and well-being, incredibly important. And the reason for that is it's difficult to predict what we're going to be required to respond to 8 months from now. It's hard to put your finger on the exact priority, community need, or vulnerability that we are going to have to build processes and systems level responses to. We can try, and historically we've been, I would say, very successful at doing that. But as we know, more and more global events and impacts are impacting us locally.
The key here is upstream intervention, and that is the focus on getting ahead of issues before they're at that critical time when we have to deal with an emergency response. That's the foundation of our Halton plan, and that's something that we've integrated as well within our service. We provided an organizing principle to facilitate greater alignment and coordination. We have great resources locally here in Oakville and in the region of Halton, and we can maximize our impact by working together, breaking down those silos, and looking at what we can all do together. That's one of the key pillars of community safety and well-being.
On the screen, you'll see an infographic which represents how community safety and well-being, or the plan, is occurring here within Halton. You'll see that there's a systems leadership group. That group is comprised of executive leadership with system planning accountabilities. Incredibly important. It is the highest levels of endorsement, support, and contribution towards a community safety well-being plan, but also a commitment from them towards trying to achieve a safer community, or at least encourage feelings of safety. They're responsible for issue identification. They're responsible for allocation of resources on behalf of their organization, and also identifying partnership opportunities. Once the systems leadership group identifies a need or an issue that they'd like to respond to, it's then directed towards an action table, which is developed and implemented to begin building those responses to system planning priorities.
And we see some key outcomes. There's 5 key outcomes that we want to highlight in this meeting. Increased coordination and collaboration between services, which is something that we can't stress enough. Improved access to services. There's a lot of services out there that we can enhance, and there's also an ability for us to streamline access to that help for people in crisis. We have greater alignment on key safety and well-being issues. Many of these issues, if not most of them, are not specific to one group or one organization. They affect all of us. Reduced demand on emergency and crisis services, which allow us to conduct proactive patrols, allow us to do other activities as opposed to simply responding to emergency situations. and enhanced systems planning, which allows us to project and look to the future on what we can do collectively as a group as we move forward to advance community safety and well-being in Halton.
Just before we move on, if I were going to distill those down into what I feel are some of the most valuable, alignment on key safety and well-being issues. When you consider the complexity of some of the things that we're going to report on and some of the action tables that are currently either in progress or being developed, the complexity of those issues requires more than one service organization to respond to. And it's incredibly important that when building those responses, that they consolidate their thought, thinking, and resources towards addressing them. So this is a forum for us to do that.
The Systems Leadership Group consists of a variety of organizations, both locally and within the region, that have the ability to impact change. They have the mandate to address these systems level issues. They have the resources, and they have the ability to collaboratively work together. There's some highlighted examples here. This list is not exclusive. There's the ability to add new groups to the Systems Leadership Group, commonly referred to as the SLG, as we move forward. And you can see some of the examples, of course, include the town of Oakville here, school, education, health, the LINs, important resources that are able to address these issues collaboratively.
And again, I'll just point out the previous slide where we were identifying participation or membership for the Systems Leadership Group. The representatives or those organizations participating in that, they meet the criteria established by the ministry for communities that are moving towards or only beginning to plan a community safety and well-being plan. So the first action table we would like to provide a brief update on, and as we're doing that, what I would ask is, I'm going to ask you to consider it within the lens or the context of four, not basic priorities, but four umbrellas. The reason why I'm going to ask you to do that, hopefully it'll make more sense when we get into the goals that we established for 2018 and 2019. But as a police service, we've established through our business planning process that our priorities are a focus on mental health and addictions, a focus on crime, a focus on priority populations, and then, of course, traffic safety. I'm going to, as I mentioned, briefly discuss some of the action tables that are occurring within the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan, and I hope that you will see and be able to draw the parallels between some of the work that's being done at the systems level and some of the things that we're delivering here locally. Beginning with, of course, mental health supports for youth. The focus here is making it easier for families, children, and youth to access mental health services. I currently sit on the Systems Leadership Group, and I'm also part of the steering committee that supports CSWB planning. And one of the things that we heard through analysis and through anecdotal and lived experience was families that are dealing with youth and mental health related issues at times can struggle with finding a one-door approach. That was an issue that needed and required some systems level planning.
If you reference the statement at the bottom there with regards to emergency department visits for mental health illness, you can see that they're highest amongst youth aged 15 to 24. It's very concerning. We know anecdotally that youth mental health is a very critical area for us to address. And this is why. You can see the rates of emergency department visits for mental illness has increased for 10 to 17-year-olds in Halton and, in fact, Ontario over the past 10 years. This is an area that we need to address. We know that 1 in 5 Canadians will suffer from a mental health crisis in their lifetime. That doesn't include the vicarious impact on parents, brothers, sisters, children. So it's an issue that affects us all. And when we can get upstream, particularly with our youth, we can have a very high impact on wellness in our community.
We have an action table on homelessness, and the focus here is a more coordinated response to homelessness. Again, I would ask you to consider that issue. Is a homeless person or a person who's suffering from homelessness due to socioeconomic status, mental health related issues, or just by virtue of their current experience, are they or could they be considered within priority populations? The answer, of course, and obviously is yes, they could.
When we look at these statistics, oftentimes people think that there is no homelessness in Halton. They think that there's no homelessness in Oakville. There is, in fact. And we can see that there, in 2018, at this point, there were 271 homeless people. in Halton, 998 emergency shelter placements in Halton in 2018. This is a critical area for us to address. And we also know that there's a tertiary impact on the issue of homelessness. We can see enhanced victimization of these individuals. We can see a crossover to mental health issues possibly as well, and crime activity as well to support themselves or to help them live. So if we're able to help these people, then we can impact a vast area, just aside from the homelessness issue. Yes.
Councillor Lischiner.
Thank you very much. A quick question regarding the residents who are homeless. Are they Oakville-based, or are they coming from other regions as well?
It would be a combination. As far as the exact breakdown, I don't have that available. Of course, I'd be happy to recover that statistic, but as it mentions there, it was a point in time. Anecdotally, what we end up seeing is the majority are residents or people that are displaced from other municipalities, but certainly by virtue of circumstance, there are people who are residents and community members who find themselves without a place to be. Improving the response to sexual assault. The focus here would be recommendations to enhance the process of reporting and investigating a sexual assault. And for us, this is a very important concept which carries obvious impacts and considerations for our police service. We have moved away from the idea or the approach to dealing with survivors of developing a service and then asking them to consume it. It's not the appropriate way to go about our service deliverable. What we need to do is invite people who at some point, either again, because of circumstance or for whatever reason, are going to be in need of police service help, ask them how they would like to see that service develop. What are the types of supports or things they would like to experience within it? And then if at all possible, incorporate that into our model and interaction with them. That is the approach that we need to take. We're moving away from proprietary ownership of policing to a more collaborative and collective approach to the services we're providing.
We know that sexual assault is a concern internationally, really, and that extends beyond workplace incidents or human trafficking in schools, domestic violence as well related. So it's very concerning. And this statistic here, indicating that there's 37 incidents of sexual assault, not sexual harassment, sexual assault in relation to every 1,000 people. That's as of 2014.
Youth exiting the care of child welfare services. Connecting more youth exiting care to education, training, and employment. Again, these are some of the most vulnerable in our community.
And this statistic, we found this staggering, that in Ontario, 44% of youth in and from care complete secondary school, a remarkably low number. And that also, similar to the homelessness issue, brings the concern about further victimization or other criminal activity possibly resulting. Important for us to set up our youth for success. And in this case, this is something that we certainly need to address.
And it's also, for me, a great example of an opportunity to be upstream. We are able to identify an issue that if collectively, as a community, we begin to address, then we can create better outcomes for people. Isolation amongst older adults. The focus here, improving on how we identify, support, and connect adults at risk of isolation.
We know that 21% of older adults, that's 65 years plus, in Halton live alone. We also know that older adults in Halton that report a strong sense of belonging also report better mental health. Very important for us to deal with. I'd also like to point out that while we see the leads here are Halton Regional Services for Seniors, Catholic Family Services, Acclaim, Links to Care, this is an issue that impacts various organizations. It could be fire, it could be EMS, it could be police who engage older adults and identify older adults in those situations.
Harmful impacts of alcohol consumption. The focus here is population level approach to reducing unsafe drinking, which of course will carry obvious impacts in safety for the community, but certainly police as well.
And unlike opioid abuse, this is an issue that has a far longer lifeline. It's something that can take place over years and impacts everybody around that person. Surprisingly, Halton has a higher proportion of residents that exceed the guidelines with regards to alcohol drinking.
Mental health planning and response. It's incredibly easy to see how this action table would fall in line with some of our service established priorities. The focus here, greater coordination of mental health planning processes to improve services to patients.
I think it's important to note within the leads here that the Halton Police are there as well. Typically a place that we haven't been in the past, but in our recent experience, we've become very engaged in that, dealing with persons in crisis, being the first contact in that crisis, and being trained and aware to help that person deal with that effectively, as opposed to it simply being an enforcement issue.
Dual diagnosis amongst Halton youth, establishing a framework to support Halton youth with a mental health and developmental issue. Once again, we see what is an incredibly vulnerable group that requires services to insulate them from the issues that they could experience during their life, but certainly to help support better outcomes for them.
And not necessarily surprising, but we see that 30 to 50% of children or youth with a developmental delay also have a mental health issue. We've got a question.
Councillor Lischinen.
Thank you, Your Worship. Sorry, I'm a couple of slides behind. I wasn't sure if you were going to have a slide on it, but with respect to alcohol consumption, now that cannabis is legal, is that also going to be on the list as well as of the harmful impacts that you're looking at directly? No, not drugs in general, just with respect to that legalization?
Terrific. It will be an area of obvious consideration, one that we continue to collect information at the systems level. What I can tell you is locally or within the framework for our planning, our strategic planning, our work plan for 2019, it is absolutely a consideration, and we're building programming into that through the police service group.
I'm glad to hear it. Thank you.
And with regards to the dual diagnosis, the lead, of course, being the Our Kids Network, who the Halton Police is directly involved with at the senior leadership group, as well as having members sitting at the working tables of that organization, which is a collaborative of local community supports, education, health, etc.
When we started talking about some of the work being done through the action tables and under the umbrella of community safety and well-being planning, we talked about the similarities in priorities and issues that we're addressing. And we also pointed out a few of the key areas or key outcomes from community safety and well-being planning. For me, this has been one of the biggest ones for us locally here. Dave and I both had the advantage of being part of some of the pioneering internally, some of the pioneering work surrounding development of the community safety and well-being plan. So moving into establishing our goals for 2018, and after having seen some of the potential benefits of that approach, we wanted to incorporate that into our formal business practice through using it or by utilizing it to establish our goals, but also begin delivering some of the things that we were intent on achieving. Our corporate business plan, 2017 to 2019, I'm sure everybody's familiar with it. It is strongly rooted and based in community safety and well-being planning. Again, I'll throw another tip of the hat to our police services board and our senior leadership. We were the first service to incorporate community safety and well-being planning into our business plan as heavily as we did. So starting with that, we'd identified the priorities that I discussed earlier. Priority populations, mental health and addictions, a focus on crime, and traffic safety. So we had these overarching priorities that we knew we wanted to incorporate into our goal-setting process. That being said, business plan was developed through broad consultation, input, and insights. What we were hoping to do was slightly tailor it or ensure that the goals that we established under those priorities were reflective of local need here in Oakville. So there was a consultation process prior to us establishing our goals for 2018. We then began to coordinate some of the activities that different organizations, some of our platoons and our investigative units committed to achieving, and then identified indicators and outcomes that we would measure throughout the course of the year to determine whether or not we were advancing on the goals we'd established for ourselves. And then finally, of course, there was an assessment phase. Like we discussed earlier, it's important to include some flexibility in your planning, so we formally included that, or began including that in our business plan, or our goal plan for 2018, to ensure that we could respond to immediate need.
This is a model that is core to what we do in community safety and well-being. This model is utilized at the service level, from the chief down to a fourth-class constable, in addressing issues of concern. The red, of course, being emergency or incident response, has historically been the main focus of police, typically responding to a 911 call, an accident, an emergency, and dealing with that. We certainly still do that, but that is only one component of what we want to do and what we need to do to effectively address risk. Risk mitigation would be the next level, and a strong example of that would be our situation table, where we present identified areas of an enhanced risk to an individual or to a group of people, and we collaboratively work towards a solution in that. It's essentially getting upstream to a problem before it gets to an emergency. Prevention, of course, is something that we're heavily involved in, and that goes towards education, helping communities harden themselves against crime, helping provide solutions and awareness to issues. And social development is an area that is key, not so much enforcement or typically, historically, police-related. It's an opportunity for us to engage, build relationships with people, to build trust, and to use our actions as creating awareness towards issues like mental health, like acceptance of new Canadians, bringing to light issues that are in our community, and bringing people together externally as well. We recognize that we are not a one-stop shop. We are not the ones who are going to solve everything. We need to work collaboratively, and through building those relationships through social development, we can bring other groups, not just government, but volunteer groups, community groups, faith groups together to help be part of the solution. This framework is utilized in everything we do. It's used in how we address the 4 priorities that Nick mentioned, and we'll get into that next.
We discussed one of our priorities, or service-wide priorities, was a focus on crime, specific to Oakville, and during our consultation and a review of some of the analysis that we had available to us, we saw that residential entries and property crime was an absolute priority within that priority. It was something that we wanted to address. Moving into 2018, the 5 years prior, we were trending upward there. In 2018, as a result of the approach that we incorporated and ensuring that some of the principles of community safety and well-being, risk mitigation, were included in our programming, we have achieved a 48% increase in criminal charges in the area of residential entries. During 2018, we reduced break and enters to historic lows that we hadn't seen in almost 14 years, which for me is an incredible reflection, not only of the work being done by the people in our local district, but also the willingness of the community to be engaged and support those initiatives. We have led and participated in a number of regional and provincial and even international investigations. We continue to work with our GTA partners, but have collaborated with police services as far away as Australia to address, respond, and identify people responsible for crime here in Oakville. We've been able to enhance community mobilization. We, in the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see an example of a communication dashboard that we created. In that, there's several quadrants that are distinct from one another. Again, it begins with explaining what police are doing in the area of immediate response, what we're doing to contribute to risk mitigation, and then invites the community to get involved through crime prevention and through social development tips or programs that we're delivering in tandem with some of the police-led initiatives. That communication dashboard has served to provide not only perspective to our public, but opportunity for them to be involved and help address the situation. And as you can see here, in 2018, it was incredibly successful, and I'm proud of it.
It's also important to recognize that we are partners with the community. And to that end, tonight we have community awards happening, and we successfully advocated for 2 members of our community who helped us solve crime, specifically break-in enters, to be celebrated at that awards, to be recognized at that award ceremony tonight.
And sorry, just before we move on, as an aside and a prelude to something that you can expect, last night we had investigators that attended a town hall meeting. And the purpose for that was to share preventative messaging, perspective on the issue, and really help contribute to residents' feelings of safety in the community. What we find more often than not is their perspective informs their reality. So it's important that we have open discussion with them and let them know exactly what the situation and scenario is. We did that last night, and investigators left and comprehensive investigation where 9 people were arrested, multiple charges laid, again, another example of crime tourism, but they left that investigation because they saw the priority was to ensure that they met, the preventative town hall meeting. So they were able to balance those 2 priorities. Historically, you would have never seen the detective sergeant in charge of a criminal investigations bureau leave, and it's not as though he left, redirect some of his focus to a town hall meeting. They're equal priorities. We understand it's as important that people feel as safe as they are while still providing them the safety that really they require through strong investigations.
Well, Sir Robert Peel would be proud to know that. Councillor Adams has a question.
It's actually not a question, it's an add-on and a thank you. Both Councillor Lischin and I attended last night with the residents and your team. You had a really great team. They did 2 presentations. They did, first of all, the presentations on the residential break-and enters, and they also did one from about theft from autos. Both were very well received. There were approximately 66 residents in attendance. They came primarily from Ward 6, but I know that there were some from Ward 3, and there were apparently some from Mississauga as well, because they heard that this presentation was coming, and they actually came all the way into Oakville to get our presentation, because I guess they couldn't get the information out of Peel. Or they felt more connected to this community to come and do it here. So
The officers and I are not going to participate in Peel bashing.
no. I'm saying that largely in jest, but it was the community. The residents who actually did the outreach to attract individuals who are interested in the information. Of course, we supported them in terms of getting material to them and getting outreach and making sure people knew where to come and all those kinds of things. But it was really a matching up of the community with the police force to make that happen. So I appreciate that. And the feedback's been very positive since.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor. And I can tell you, certainly from our perspective, the feedback was similar. On the return, received phone calls from the investigator, Detective Sergeant Paul Foley, who was excited to have been a part of it. When you provide a service to someone and they appreciate it the way that our community does, which is something that I've always felt is slightly unique to our community, it's valued, and it does. It has an impact on the officers that have participated in it. So thank you.
Councillor Lischin.
I do want to make a special mention that Councillor Adams did a lot of work with Detective Sergeant Foley to organize all that. And it was very insightful to have a show and tell, because I'm not sure how many pictures were taken of Officer Shane showing where the proper placement of the locks should be and all the rest of it. The child safety locks are one of the things you wouldn't even think of for crime prevention for someone actually entering your home. So I want to thank Councillor Adams for, and of course the residents who did proactively ask for that town hall. Thank you.
Well done, everybody.
Traffic safety and enforcement is a critical issue in our community. We all recognize that, specifically towards impaired driving by alcohol or drug, aggressive driving, and dealing with community complaints that come directly to the police or through council. In 2018, we saw a 30% increase in warnings issued. Now, warnings are not simply verbal, they're actually a documented warrant similar to a ticket. There's no fine. However, it's an opportunity for us to formally caution a driver for their activity. It's a positive interaction. It's a learning opportunity for that person. So it's something that is important to us, and it's important to those who are driving in our community to understand that they need to obey the law. They need to keep safe. There were 13,126 provincial offenses notices issued in 2018, a significant number. We saw a 74% increase in roadside tests. A roadside test is either an alcohol screening device or it's a standard field sobriety test that's conducted at the side of the road. We saw an additional 1,345 hours of proactive patrol compared to the year before related to traffic safety. 3 times as many roadside tests issued during seasonal ride, which is around December, the Christmas ride program. A 12% increase in impaired driving arrests. And very notably, many of these arrests resulted from our community reporting impaired driving activity to our communications center. Over 379,000 officer hours were devoted towards traffic safety. We have expedited responses to traffic complaints, where we deal with them directly, either through online reporting that comes directly to us, or reporting that comes through council members. We have strategic participation and engagement in related programs at a local, provincial, and national level. In fact, it's Canada Road Safety Week this week, and our officers are heavily engaged in that education and enforcement campaign. I can say, speaking as an officer, and Nick and I have had some discussion about it, one of the most impactful things that a police officer can see is a motor vehicle collision where there's been personal injury or death. It's horrific. It is one of the worst scenes that you can come across. And coupled with that, doing a death notification to a family member for a lost child or a lost parent or sibling is a terrible thing to have to do. That helps us in recognizing the importance of this issue. It's not simply us out there issuing tickets or picking on people. It's a very important level of enforcement, a level of engagement to keep our roads safe. We have vulnerable road users. We have cyclists. We have children walking to school. We have people trying to enjoy their day-to-day life on sidewalks and crosswalks. It's important for us as a community to keep them safe.
Thank you. Councillor Adams again.
Just a quick question. You've got a map up there. It's a heat map. Can you explain what that is? What I see? What drew my attention were the big red blobs at Dundas and Trafalgar, and I guess that's Iroquois Shore and Trafalgar.
Absolutely. So the map that's up on the screen and your screen is a heat map, as obviously you've recognized, but the red areas are areas where personal injury accidents are occurring. So obviously the more dark the red, the more frequent the accidents are occurring. The blue are where fatalities have occurred. Inspector Stewart spoke briefly about the impacts that traffic safety carries. I can only begin to tell you how many times you hear anecdotal stories from officers, and now with social media, on social media through Twitter, about why don't you have something better to do with your time? Why don't you go and find a bad guy? We do get that at times. But the impacts that those collisions carry are rippling and far move beyond the people that are involved in them. For everybody that is either associated to or responds, carries legitimate, genuine impacts on our community's safety and well-being. So we will continue to invest in it as though it's a priority, and we will still arrest the bad guy. So
Was this map generated based on 2018 statistics?
yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Lischina.
Just a quick question with the number, the 13,000 provincial offenses, does that also include distracted driving?
Yes.
It does?
Yes, absolutely. That's a provincial offense. Yes.
Maybe you would, you've mentioned the red, you've mentioned the blue. The black dots, they are what?
They're personal injury accidents as well. The red or the outer highlight is meant to more quickly illustrate where more of those black dots are occurring when they're overlaid.
Well, then it's fascinating that the blue and the red don't correlate, which I guess my takeaway is fatalities can happen anywhere.
They're difficult to predict, but what we do know is if we look at provincial statistics, the majority of fatalities and serious personal injury collisions occur due to impaired driving, distracted driving, and aggressive driving. And that's why when we talked about tailoring our response under the regional umbrella of traffic safety, we selected impaired, aggressive, and community complaints for our areas of local focus.
I see aggressive driving every time I drive in our community. And it's extraordinarily risk-taking, highly aggressive. Like, I always shake my head. It's like they think they're acrobats or something. Councillor Adams.
I have one more thing that we just noticed while we're looking at this map, and I guess the fact that we're talking about this map so much is because this is the thing we hear from residents all the time. And Councillor Lischin and I get, just like our colleagues, I'm sure, constant complaints about speeding on local streets, in particular in the Falgarwood and the Joshua Creek area for our communities. And when I look at this map, there are no black dots on the interior, generally, on the interior of those communities, and yet that's where we hear all the complaints from, really. And it looks to me like where you're seeing the real accidents are actually are largely on the arterial roads. Is that something that you are planning for or trying to address specifically, the difference between the slower speed, 50 kilometer an hour local residential roads versus the 60 or 70 kilometer hour arterial roads?
Absolutely it is. If we were to overlay our enforcement, what you would see is that it mirrors that to some extent, but you would see some of the enforcement occurring in response to community complaint. We discussed earlier about how important it is for our residents to feel safe in the community, and while I think of it, a thanks to yourself and other councillors who relay some of the concerns of residents. At the end of the day, in their community, they're not feeling safe. So we will, if at all possible, and if resources allow us to, devote resources to the issue they've identified. When we discuss personal injury versus fatalities, His Worship very rightly pointed out that there's not a direct overlay. That's difficult to predict. So we try to be as responsive as is responsible to community concerns and complaints, because ultimately it affects their feeling in their community. Having said that, we balance that with some of the analysis that is available to us and make sure that our response also incorporates where we know some of those more serious collisions are occurring.
Councillor Duddick.
Thank you.
Councillor Duddick.
Yeah. Thank you, through your worship. This is the #1 issue that we get faced with, as you can understand. And it came to our attention that out west, one of the provinces out there has permitted through their legislation to have police officers who are geared solely towards traffic enforcement. In other words, they're not having to deal with the balance of crime versus traffic enforcement. Is that something that would assist you in terms of deploying your officers? Because I know it's a juggling act and very difficult to do. But for the residents who keep saying there's no enforcement, and we try to reinforce exactly what you had referenced, that just because you see them speeding, and we try the send a note off and all the various other things in the speed board and that, but they still have concerns in regards to it. Is that something that we're looking at in terms of the province here, to look at something to enable you to have somebody do specifically traffic? Because of course it would be court costs and everything else.
Thank you, Councillor. If I could direct your attention back to the first slide that included our organizational structure, there is a unit currently connected to Oakville that focuses exclusively on traffic safety. And that's the unit that most recently has been taken over by Sergeant Chimber, previously was being manned by Sergeant Bistis. I'd be happy to share that contact info with anybody here. Thank you.
Yeah, so the principle is that they will, as he said a couple of times, they'll move their focus to your hotspots. And there's a terrific story from a different part of town, from the AGM of the Residents Association, where they had asked for this attention and gotten it, And the people who were generating the demand for it turned out to be the ones getting the tickets. And so they changed their request after that. Councillor Palmer and then Councillor Chisholm, sorry, Councillor Duddick?
Can I just finish? We did work with Gus in regards to this, and we still were not getting anywhere. So again, there's a frustration there. Hopefully this is going to improve, but like I say, Queen Mary is one that we've had numerous issues with. And to their credit, the police have tried to assist where possible, but that's where the frustration is that we still find, even through our traffic and engineering and the police, these things still are outstanding and still an issue. So I'm just raising that.
I think the officers are hearing you, and there may be more attention to Queen Mary. Thank you. This is one of the things that can happen. Councillor Palmer, then Chisholm, then Robertson, then Elgar.
Residents to the online reporting tool. Except I don't really know what happens after they report something. Can you just go through the steps of what happens when a report comes in with someone reporting a speedy driver or dangerous driving?
Yes, the community member, the person who has that complaint reports it online, that generates an incident, and then that complaint then is delivered to the relative district response team supervisor, who in our case is now Sergeant Milo Chimber, for action. So it's just a more expeditious way to relay that concern.
Okay.
And it's then looked at like the other complaints that come from.
So are they basically, would the driver be sent a letter? Do they get a phone call? What?
We have, there's two, so we have a road watch program in which that's the case where a driver would be notified. If a driving member of the public notices some poor behavior, they get a license plate, they get some information about the vehicle, and they lay a road watch complaint. Then what happens is we as a service issue a letter to that offending driver and advise them of the concern for their driving activity. There's no court process after that. It's more of an educational and awareness piece for them.
Okay.
If there's a complaint lodged for speeding or stop signs related, for example, then our traffic team will look at that. They'll conduct a scan of that area. They'll conduct some enforcement around the time, the date that the concern is, evaluate that concern, either validate it or decide that it's not in fact a concern, which sometimes happens. Sometimes it's perception
Right.
as well.
And if you're getting the same complaint on the same vehicle numerous times, it's something more than a letter.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's why it's tracked. So we're not going to have a person continually get a road watch letter for the same type of driving activity. It would, if there's multiple complaints through that program, then there's a trigger where that person will in fact be contacted directly by police.
Right.
Unfortunately, a lot of times they're transient in nature. They're not necessarily members of our community.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big issues, as I was mentioning to you earlier, was in our ward is around the school, the traffic. And we find that when the officers are there and they're on site, of course, the incidents reduce, but we know with the resources that it's just not something that can be done every day, every morning at school drop-off and school pickup when it's really, really busy in the area. But definitely when there is a police presence, we see a difference, so.
And that's why it's critical to look at these issues through that community safety and well-being lens, to look at it through those four levels of intervention. Because if we're simply doing enforcement and that's all we're doing, when we leave, the problem will come back.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
we need that education, and we need the schools to become on board with educating the parents. And I know that's happened through Gus and in Ward 7 specifically.
Yes, yes.
And we need that social development piece. Your worship hit on it. It's almost become a community mindset where people drive so aggressively everywhere. They act in ways behind their steering wheel that they would never act in a lineup at a movie theater or at the
Yeah.
grocery store. They would never interact with someone else. But we've developed this unfortunate mindset in society
Yeah.
where people are very aggressive drivers.
Thank you.
Councillor Chisholm?
Thank you, Your Worship. This is a very complex issue with respect to the challenge we have in speeding and aggressive driving, and it seems to be on the increase, but I think the resources, and I would concur with my colleague, Councillor Duddick, with respect to the enforcement. And it's just what we're seeing and what is coming back is that the enforcement's not happening. I'm going to put something way out here, and it's just, I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but is there any consideration with the police and our bylaw enforcement closing some gaps with respect to maybe the possibility of enforcement of speeding and aggressive driving in our neighborhoods could be looked at a municipal level rather than at a police level, or a combination of services to come together to, I think it's a shortage of resources. You can't be every place every time. And I'm not trying to put weight on our staff and so forth, but is there a concept out there, and Councillor Duddick brought it up out west, they're doing that. Is there any creative thinking to look at this enforcement in a different way rather than just on a police scope and looking at it? Because I know you're talking community, but is there another way that we can increase our resources to make this better than it is now?
Maybe, let me get in front of that. During the province's updating of the Police Service Act recently, this was considered and rejected. So the brutal answer is no. There's probably a long, polite way of saying it, but them's the facts, that's what happened. Yeah.
So petition the province. Yeah, that's it.
I think I got you off the tough one there.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Next one is Councillor Robertson.
Thanks for the report. As a longtime high school teacher, I love that the proactive piece of having officers within the high schools and everything, and that education piece. And I think it's working to get them more acclimatized. My question then is, you have these amazing proactive, ways of doing things now. And every comment around this table is about the reactive, what are we doing with speeding? So my first question is, how many officers in that traffic unit?
In response to that, that traffic unit is 8, along with a supervisor. But the purpose of this slide is to really demonstrate the goal that we selected for ourselves here locally, specific to traffic safety. What I can tell you, and the 30% increase in warning and the increase in provincial offense notices from an enforcement perspective is the direct result of really prioritization of traffic safety. We have 4 different uniform platoons. At times, we even have plainclothes officers engaging in traffic enforcement and response and some of the things that you would more typically expect to see police involved in. So the easy answer is on the traffic safety unit. It's not a huge unit, but the probably more genuine and real answer is every officer that is wearing a uniform out there is a traffic safety officer, and we are issuing more PONs, being engaged more often. And in response to Councillor Chisholm, we are considering other creative and partnered initiatives to help address some of the issues.
Good.
Councillor Elgar.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I don't think you have to worry about ever losing your job, the way things are going with speeding. But question is regarding advising the police about speeding issues. I've been sending them off to our town staff, Jill Stephen, who is very, very receptive to receiving them. Should we? Is it okay if we also copy? I hear it's Milo Sinbar. If copy him on that also. And is he just milo.sinbar@haltonpolice.ca? Is that his email address?
That is correct. Actually, prior to and in preparation of this meeting, one of the things that Dave and I did was renew a reporting framework to help answer some of those questions and direct community concerns. We will always be interested in hearing from the community. Certainly, we appreciate all the insight that were provided through council and your leadership of that community about the issues. But like we were discussing earlier, if there is never an occurrence report entered into it, then we aren't able to overlay the data that's created by that complaint with some of the issues that we see here to help direct some of the resources and inform our decision making. So, You know, if it were a collective community concern, absolutely. Don't ever feel reluctant to get in touch with Sergeant Chimber. That's what he's there for. But I would also encourage residents to report those concerns officially so that it can then form some of our decision-making.
So just to help, I hope, you mean, please get the license plate and a la Road Watch, phone it in or email it in.
Absolutely.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. Well, I hope you're ready for the emails that are going to start coming. I think you may get a few. Second question is, related to it's a program that's starting in Great Britain. It's in Coquitlam, BC, and they're having amazing results. It's called the Scarecrow Cop Program. Have you looked at that at all?
So locally, we haven't yet. It has been done in other municipalities. And one of the issues that we found with it was day 1, day 2 was great. Day 3 and 4, people are conditioned to it. Especially when we're addressing local community concerns, because generally speaking, the people responsible for the driving behavior in our communities and neighborhoods live there and become conditioned to the idea that there's an empty cruiser there. But we are looking at it.
Okay, because from what I'm reading, it sounds like it is working, because the Scarecrow Cop isn't always a Scarecrow Cop. Quite often, it's a regular police officer that replaces them. But I'm just wondering how we can coordinate something like that, because I understand the cutout only costs about $500, because Westminster has also tried it, and it's $500 for the cutout. So if we get one of your police to stand up there and we could do the cutout, I'd be willing to chip in money to try it. But then you have to be around every so often to be there instead of the cutout.
Well, we're happy to discuss and look at anything to help address the issue, and I think Dave would make a great cutout.
I don't disagree with you. Okay. I thank you.
Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Worship. I wanted to drill into the Road Watch a little bit more, but Councillor Parmar beat me to it, so thank you for that. But I do have a follow-up on that, and that is a number of years ago, we used to have these district, not command tables like we have now, but we have these district response committees in each one of the policing districts across Oakville, and councillors met with citizens and such. And out of that came the PC Cops program. I think that's what we called it, where we would loan, the police department would loan a signboard and a radar gun to neighbors or residence groups or whatever to actually do the naming and shaming thing in terms of speeding. Is that a program that's still available? Is that gear still available to community groups if they want to get involved in proactive I guess, awareness of speeding issues?
The program itself doesn't exist locally. However, informally, it's certainly a resource that we could offer. We do have the signboard. We have speed measurement devices that can be utilized. Our officers have gone out with community members who've laid complaints to help validate or unvalidate those complaints. As well, just speaking to the Scarecrow thing, we've done that recently as well, even locally, where we've used a cruiser and parked it in a location and then frequently had to move it. We've had, as Nick mentioned, a variety of levels of success, but that's certainly something that we're open to and happy to engage with that in those circumstances, sir.
How would a member of the community trigger that kind of initiative?
That would be through connection with Sergeant Chimber.
Okay.
He's certainly the one who would be able to, and I would expect that if they're providing or asking for a specific service, we're happy to provide it, you know, and work with them if we can.
So that in the old days, when I was a young counselor, that was basically, it was a loan of equipment. The police officers didn't have to go, so it wasn't resource dependent in terms of the staff. 'Cause I know that's always a challenge. Is that still an option as well? So if XYZ Residents Association wants to borrow the gear and do it in the neighborhood, is that something that can be arranged?
We can facilitate
Terrific.
that,
Okay,
certainly.
I'll hold you to that and follow up with you on that. I want to know about occurrences. So everybody around this table, you know, contacts the department with various hotspots and concerns. When does that become an actual occurrence and get registered beyond simply an email? Is it when there's an attachment of a license plate, or is there some recording mechanism so that there's some sort of awareness created in the volume of calls or the nature of the calls?
Not really a simple answer to that, but what it becomes attached, or it attaches itself to some of the data that we do have available to us in a number of different ways. And it can be through either originally a complaint that we receive, it can be through a traffic stop that's conducted on the area, or when we ask officers to begin logging some of their time that they're working towards or devoting towards addressing the issue. So it enters itself from a number of different areas. And this, again, is why it's important, I think, to encourage community members to officially report, because we do, you're right, our resources are finite. And, you know, we have to make very real decisions about where they should be devoted on, and with potentially some serious consequences. So in doing that, we spend a fair bit of time, or at least the amount of time commensurate to this issue, in looking at the data and asking for analysis. What's the composition of complaint? What's the type of enforcement? We've received a complaint. We've spent X number of hours there. What were the results? Have there been collisions there? Can we validate it? It really is a multifaceted process, but the short answer is it can enter its way in a number of different forms.
My last question is with respect to the connection between the police department. I keep saying our because I serve two roles here, but the police department and our engineering staff. So is there a connection where if members of the service are recognizing that there are challenges from an engineering perspective in terms of signage or in terms of road design, et cetera, is there an open line of communication to the engineering team to say, you need to look at this and find, don't just focus on warrants, focus on maybe looking at a new way to deal with the engineering. And I think of roads like what I refer to as the Glen Ashton Raceway or Central Park, which are both in my ward, which both have, you know, curvatures or chicanes that make them very difficult to see ahead. And so there's challenges around that. If that information was conveyed from an enforcement perspective to the engineers, maybe that mistake wouldn't be made again or mitigated after the fact.
You're absolutely correct. The three areas that we focus on with traffic are education, enforcement, and engineering. Yeah. And we're fortunate to have a great relationship with our Town of Oakville Engineering Department. They're incredible. And there is constant communication and engagement and face-to-face meetings with our traffic safety specialists and the town engineers. So it's something that it goes both ways. You know, certainly we can bring an issue to their concern and suggest, you know, perhaps traffic circles, speed bumps, you know, a sign, perhaps the timing of the lights needs to change. And we've experienced great success in that regard with exploring those options. Also at a regional level, because we do have regional roads going through the town of Oakville where we need to deal with a different department, a regional department. But it's certainly something that we're very, very alive to and engaged with. And again, we're lucky to have that relationship.
That's great. So happy to have that response. Thank you so much. Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In our communications with our residents, what would you like us to promote to them? Is it the Scram program? Is it if you see something, say something? What message would you like us to get out to our residents?
For me, it's about elevating social conscience towards the issues that we are addressing. So, you know, the answer to that would be, it would really depend on what you think is most specific and exclusive to your community. I love the idea, if you see something, say something, because that's universal application. Can deal with impaired driving, traffic safety related issues. It really solicits the community mobilization and engagement piece that is needed and that we've been so fortunate to benefit from. I think that's a great start, but certainly any of the prevention messaging that we push out through our social media channels and media releases, the more that we can share with our residents, the more informed they feel. I can't tell you how many times we'll go to a meeting or have a discussion with somebody who has a very legitimate concern, and we'll share some of the programming and some of the work that's being done or things that are available. 85% of the time, people are shocked by what is being done by the police services. So the more information, the better.
Thank you for that. The trail program in our area, it's incredibly popular. There are places where the kids can go and the officers find it a little more difficult. So to see officers out on the bikes is just huge. That'll be starting soon for the year?
Yeah, generally we start that programming coinciding with weather and school being out.
All right, and the last thing, just an observation. I love the pickup trucks. The look, the look on drivers' faces when,
get pulled over
when
with a
they're lit up, it's good stuff.
Mark Tarasso loves the pickup truck as well.
I see him on Trafalgar Road, just
It's
often.
it's an incredible tool for us, simply for seeing and getting that evidence. You know, and we you know, can't highlight enough the ingenuity and the effort of even our frontline officers, because even without that direction from us, they help come up with solutions and innovative ways of addressing things. I was at an intersection last week and I saw an officer on a bicycle who was at the intersection going through the stopped cars looking for people who were texting. That's not an official program. That's not something we've told them to do. They're coming up with creative ways on their own to address those concerns, because we know that distracted driving is a huge cause of injury and death nationally.
I remember Matt Baker doing that. Councillor Haslett-Teal.
Thank you very much for your, all your information. Just further to what all the other councillors have said, on Road Watch, one of the pushbacks I get as a new councillor is this sense of, and I don't know that it's, I mean, it's just perception. I don't think it's reality, but that they're nervous about having their name attached to a report. And specifically going out, taking a picture of the license plate. Now, my neighbor knows that I took this picture, or whoever it is, and I'm now subject to, you know, potential victimization or whatever they're thinking. Is there anything that's done to protect their anonymity if we encourage them to try and do this more?
Yeah, what I would suggest, or what I would reassure them with, is very rarely would they be provided the occurrence report or the complainant. Now, having said that, it would be available by FOI. It's not as though, you know, we would have a legislative authority that would allow us to vet that. But in the 2.5 years almost that I've been attached to Oakville, I don't think we've ever had to disclose, or anybody has ever asked, was it my neighbor? That generally they're more preoccupied with the idea that police are there and they've just been issued a ticket. So the risk isn't very real there.
Okay. As another sort of follow-up is, so lots of things have come up today around whether it's Road Watch, whether it's Scarecrow, whether it's being able to give a residents association the tools to have a day where they get to play with the radar and scare their neighbors.
The taser.
I'm new at all this. So how do we see that into fruition? Because I'm going to say it, it probably won't go over very well, but aren't we lucky that this is what we worry about? I mean, we don't worry about things that other towns have to deal with. And it's not that speeding is not an issue and it's a bad culture that we have, but it's a bit of a blessing that this is what we have to worry about. So I guess I'm just looking, how does it go from concept and idea to fruition? Because that's where the rubber hits the road.
Great question. And it really is, leading into this and when we were developing the 2019 work plan that we're gonna give you a quick prelude to, and certainly through these discussions. One of the things that I see, and to me it's obvious we should be doing, is similar to how we responded to the break and enter issue, where we provided a communication dashboard about here's what police are doing it, or here's what police are doing, here's how we're doing it, here's what you can do, and here's what's really happening. I feel, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, but that might go a long way to help alleviate some of those issues. So we'd be happy to do that.
Okay, that would be great. And can I go back off traffic to just one other issue? Panhandling. So I got a wonderful response when I called and asked the question about concern for the individual's well-being versus not just where they're standing and how much they're disrupting traffic flow. But there's a bit of nervousness because if we publicly say, okay, we want to pass a bylaw that says you shouldn't be doing this, which allows you, I guess, from my understanding, to stop them and have that interaction. I mean, it's a dual-edged sword. We want them to have the resources, as it sounds like you do, to deal with the underlying issue of why they are doing this. We also understand that they probably are coming in on the train and think it's a great location. How do we handle this in a way that doesn't make us look like we're mean-spirited individuals, because that's not the intent. And yet, it's dangerous what they're doing. They are standing at the QEW and Trafalgar, at Trafalgar and Cornwall, further north up on Trafalgar. And I just look for your advice.
I think ultimately it comes down to an engagement issue and to try to provide those individuals with resources if they require them. And that's something that our officers are armed with. We developed a response to that incident and an engagement kind of model in dealing with panhandlers. You know, this problem exists in many communities across the area. It's something that we recognize. You know, in some cases they do need resources. In some cases there are housing, there are other things that we could provide them. In most cases, they're not accepted or wanted. It comes down to, for the most part, members that are not, or panhandlers that are not part of our community who are coming in here to make money. And we engage them with a view first of helping them if they require it, offering those resources if they need them, conversing with them, finding out if there's something we can help them with, where they're from. And if there is a safety issue, we deal with it. If there's a safety issue with them interfering with traffic, that's an offense. If there's a concern for their well-being or a mental health issue, we deal with that also. So it's, I think ultimately we're on the same page. We want to help these people if they need help and offer them the resources that they need if they're in need. And we also want to make sure that our other road users and pedestrians and community is safe as well. Everyone has an equal stake in it.
So just for clarity, do you need a bylaw passed that says you can't do this in Oakville? Or can you stop them without that and engage, as you have eloquently said, in finding a way to support and help them?
Well, of course, it'd be dependent on the bylaw and whether or not they would be able to find a way around it. But specific to your situation, earlier on we talked about some of the staffing reassignments, and I believe you were working with Sergeant Eric Van Vliet on that. Prior to him leaving, he provided us an update with that issue, and the update will probably give the answer. Of the people that we've been able to identify that are locally involved in panhandling, none of them accepted an offering of resources. None of them lived locally, and in fact, some of them were also, we had a record of operating in other jurisdictions. So now that we've addressed the need to, from a social development lens, to insulate them from the homelessness, the discussion revolves around enforcement. Unfortunately, Safe Streets Act, they're professional. They know what's required, what we have to see in order to, so that makes itself less available to us. This becomes, for me, an element of prevention. I would love to, see in a newspaper and begin that message of the simplest way to have them leave is by not giving them money. And if we could promote that message, I think you'd find the situation would alleviate itself.
Okay.
And that's kind of where we're planning on going next.
Okay.
So, not to put too fine a point on it, if we're dealing with professional panhandlers, this is the same thing. It's like, if you feed the coyote, you're gonna keep the coyote. So, stop feeding them.
Sorry to interrupt you. There was an article going back sometime in the Sun, and it was a similar scenario where a person had been followed to their multi-million-dollar house. Anecdotally, I can tell you that we've had officers who have spoken to businesses in the areas where these panhandlers are parking their luxury vehicles. So if we were able to show that to the community, I'm sure that very quickly they would find their target market dries up, I hope.
Okay. So knowing that, so don't give them the money. Can you still stop them without a bylaw? Sorry to put a fine point on it, but.
Each case is on its own merit because
Okay.
it depends. And like it was stated, they know, they're professionals to
So they
For the
know
most
we can't
part,
do.
they know exactly the line that they can walk on.
Okay.
And what they can do. Like if they're interfering with traffic, if there's a safety concern, then that's our best level of engagement.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, well, the fire went out. No, wait, Counselor Chisholm again.
Again. Just a couple quick things. Can we have a copy of this over the presentation?
Of course you can.
Thank you very much. And I'm a firm believer in metrics. This information, to me, is very important to give back, because what happens, we're dealing with, in our ward, older generation, and they don't see the police doing anything. You know, they just drive around and, you know, have coffee, whatever. What we need to tell them, that you're doing things like how many infractions, what's going on, and I even say that with our bylaw, we need to tell our residents that there are things happening. And if we can continue on with that, I think that'll be on a communication piece. It's very important. They need to know that we are doing this. And I think this is great information. And we will probably extrapolate some of this information into our newsletter. So any of that information on enforcement, and with all due respect, most of our residents, it's all about enforcement. And so if we can show that, I think that relieves some of the stress and tension with some of our residents.
We'd be happy to do that.
Thank you.
I think you can move ahead now.
Moving on from traffic.
Mental health and addictions. We spoke very briefly about how important that is, not only to our police service, but certainly here locally as well. Here in Oakville, we have a police hospital liaison committee. We sit on with a number of representatives from Halton Health. And really the focus and purpose of that committee is to discuss and address areas of mutual concern between police and the hospital, i.e. primarily emergency. Historically, moving back maybe 15 years ago, I can remember working in Oakville and being at the old Oakville Hospital and spending 12 hours with a person who was in crisis and sitting amongst people that were there for other reasons while the person was in handcuffs. And, you know, that was an obvious area where both of us, together, we could collectively be better. And through development of transfer of care protocol, police hospital liaison communications protocol, and some of those discussions, along with issue-specific response teams, like our mobile crisis rapid response team, aftercare teams, we've been able to reduce those wait times. So from the time an officer walks through the door with a person who's in crisis to the time they leave, the median wait time in 2018 was 60. But at times was as low as 40 minutes, which is an hours over hours improvement of what we've seen. And it certainly represents the gold standard provincially. So, you know, combined with some of the other things that we are doing in the area of mental health, for example, our service has committed to have all frontline officers trained in crisis intervention training. That is an incredible commitment and accomplishment, which is well underway. A large percentage of our frontline officers, regardless of whether or not it's headed as mental health, respond to a big chunk of mental health related issues. It occurs throughout domestic situations, assaults at times, and then of course there are people who are in crisis and really need help, but if you bin that into an officer's day, it represents a big percent. So the idea that we are committing to providing them more training to better those outcomes is, in my opinion, and certainly the services and the chiefs, their police services board, that's a huge accomplishment and something we're incredibly proud of. Into addictions. Recently, I was at a committee meeting and there was another officer there, an executive officer. I won't disclose anything else other than that, but we were talking about some of the addiction issues that we've seen. And at the time, they were discussing the revolving door of bail. People who are experiencing severe addictions at times find themselves in conflict with the law. And his frustration surrounded the idea that somebody would be arrested for a drug-related offense or a property crime that could be at least partially rooted in their addictions, and then they'd be released. The same thing would occur and the cycle of addiction would occur. Thankfully, our service and our region has available to it drug treatment court, court-supervised treatment for people whose offenses are rooted in addictions. So when I mentioned that to him, he was surprised, and it was almost as though it was, you know, the leading edge. Like, can you please send me a copy of that document? That's a court that we've started here in 2012. So I mentioned that, again, for context and perspective, because the programming that we've built around the idea that we need to find a better and different way exclusive from enforcement to address severe addiction issues is well underway, and it's part of our community safety and well-being application in the area of addictions.
Priority populations. This is one that's close to my heart. I'm the former commander of our Regional Community Mobilization Bureau, which is primarily responsible for outreach and engagement. And in my 24 years as a police officer, most of those years were spent in Oakville, and I've seen this town change. The tapestry of the town has changed dramatically, and we have a very rich and vibrant community that consists of a variety of different cultural and religious groups. Those groups have been welcomed with open arms in our community. However, we recognize that global events, some of the terrible things that are happening around the world, have an impact locally. If there's an act of terror, it has an impact locally, and it's not necessarily a criminal act or you know, a firm act. It's often a feeling. It's a feeling of inclusion, a feeling of being safe, a feeling of being connected to the community and to the police. Many of these people come from either South America or the Middle East, for example, and they have very poor, a very poor perception of the police, you know, because often the police are quite corrupt where they're originally from. They have a distrust of government. They have, you know, they harbor these feelings because of their learned experiences, and it's incumbent on us to make sure that we break down those barriers, and we often can do that in the simplest ways through engaging in activities and supporting their events and in speaking to them, in helping them feel safe. A great example of that is a project that we have, a program that we have called #Prevent, which is when there is a terrorist incident, when there's a global incident that we feel is going to impact our local community, we reach out to those communities, let them know that we care what we're doing. We have extra patrols. We engage their leadership at our level with faith leaders, cultural leaders. We have our officers who are on the front line, make sure that they're on the ground, that they're at the Gurdwara, they're at the temple, they're at the mosque, helping and just, you know, alleviating those fears and those concerns. We help them with safety planning. We help them with coming up with responses if there is an incident locally. That happens at a variety of levels. We have a diversity engagement table that Nick and I regularly attend and work with groups from a variety of different cultural, religious, ethnic backgrounds in our community. And it's not simply a case of us providing those groups with information or guidance. It's a case of us learning from them as well, and what we can do better and how we can work with them towards making our community safer and better. We have officers, frontline officers, who are developing programs like Project Book, for example, is highlighted here. This high-level overview. This is a project that was developed by a constable on a platoon who has nothing to do with youth engagement by their mandate other than general patrol, to engage underprivileged youth, to help mentor them, to help them learn, to help further their education. Those opportunities are something that we've seen the idea of community safety and well-being and engagement translate all the way down to our frontline officers, which is awesome. We've highlighted the Victim Restoration Service Strategy here, which is a pilot program out of Oakville where we have officers who engage and connect with victims of crime, victims of violent crime, victims of property crime where they feel unsettled or violated through a break and enter, and to help empower them, to help that person regain their sense of security, to regain their sense of ownership of that area, to provide them with safety tips, to ask them if there's any more information that they can provide, to be part of the solution to capture offenders and to basically to empower them to action. Through all of these examples, there's many more, all these examples, the common theme is that we're working directly in Oakville with our priority populations locally to make sure that they're part of our community, that they're part of the solution in making our community safer and more well.
Yeah, the focus here has been moving beyond just cosmetic inclusion. We're not telling people, You're welcome, of course they are, but we're showing them they're welcome by asking for their feedback on the services that they're delivering, asking them to help participate in building them. That is really the legitimate and, in my opinion, genuine way in supporting inclusivity. We talked about the Victim Restoration Service. During a discussion our investigator had post with a person whose home had broken into and collecting some feedback from him, we recognize from a customer service perspective, we can be better. One of the gaps that person identified for us was it had been 2 months, they weren't sure what had happened with the break and enter, kind of it was up in the air, an investigator hadn't been in contact with them because really there wasn't much more to report at that time. But really, how much would it hurt for that investigator to deliver a quick phone call in an area that we've identified as a priority and just provide a quick update? And either, here's where the case is moving toward, which contemporarily has become important. We're arresting people in the area of residential break and enters for offenses that occurred 8 months ago. It's nice if the first time they hear from us isn't, by the way, we need a statement, but here's where the investigation's going. Be an advocate for us, because if these people come back to your neighborhood, we need you to promote the message, share the message, and they're perhaps your strongest advocates if you do that for them. So moving into 2019, we started off this presentation talking about how proud we were really of the people that work for our service, but the community and the leadership and some of the achievements that we've been able to accomplish. In 2018, we began dipping our toe into the water of community safety and well-being planning and how we could incorporate that more formally into our business practice. And we started that in our district. Obviously, because of some of the results and successes that we have had, we've now been able to move that or support movement of that from a local application to a regional, more formal internal strategy that's being adopted by other districts. And this is an example of what you see here. I apologize for the amount of text. It's not meant to, don't worry, I'm not going to walk through it line by line, but you'll see that generally there's 3 areas. There's a strategic priority. Then there are goals that are established by the districts, and those goals aren't established exclusively by the district commander, much like we did in 2018. They're established through some consultation to make sure that local consideration is included in that regional priority. And then, of course, we've identified key performance indicators and key result indicators, which are regularly monitored to see whether or not we are making any progress towards achieving what are, at times, some very lofty goals and objectives. We've taken every effort to expand on the successes we've seen and actually reach for more. So beginning, and I'll just walk through them, Dave and I will walk through them very quickly. Please feel free to ask any questions. But for 2019, our first priority is, big surprise, traffic safety. Specifically in the area of impaired driving, aggressive driving, and distracted driving, but also community feelings of traffic safety and responsiveness. And again, one of our planned activities is to develop a communication dialogue on traffic safety, which is a great example of some of the utility of having these types of feedback sessions.
Our regional priority number 2 is reducing crime trends in priority areas.
Councillor Chisholm.
KPIs. I understand your statements are qualitative statements, but there's no quantitative point of reference compared to last year, the numbers. Are you going to include those numbers as part of your quantitative KPIs?
We do have them. So I could compare them not only to last year, but in one of the slides you'll see we've got a 5-year occurrence count that is representative of a few different areas over the course of 5 years. So we definitely have the comprehensive data in order to support those KPIs.
That information would be very, very good as part of to align it with your KPIs.
We could, I'd be happy to provide that in the next week.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Crime trends is obviously a real priority for us as police and regionally and locally here in Oakville. So we're committed to reducing the impact of property crime through programming that's tailored specifically to our community. we recognize that Oakville is different than from Burlington, it's different from Halton Hills, Milton, and what is a priority in one of those other communities is not necessarily the main priority here. And a great example of that is the break and enter issue. That is a high priority here locally, and it's something that we're focused on. And we have a menu of items that we are delivering with regards to that, be it community engagement, town sessions, making sure that we're linking up with the community, linking up with victims through programming that we've just discussed, as well as leveraging technology through social media and promotion of bringing the community in to be part of the solution, to help identify offenders, to post pictures and updated media releases on unknown criminal activity that we're trying to solve by making the community part of that solution. And you know, the key performance indicators and key results indicators in this regard are fairly evident to us in the statistics in clearance, or what we like to call solve rates, the amount of crime, the activities that are happening, as well as you know, an overall reduction in related incidents.
Then moving into our next strategic priority, of course, it focuses on priority populations. Here locally, we intend to reduce victimization among priority populations, i.e. hate crime, hate incidents. Our perspective here is one is too many, and that's what we're trying. Doesn't mean we're going to achieve it, but we're going to invest as much as we can in order to try. We are looking to insulate related communities through responsive programming, like some of the programs that Dave mentioned earlier, but also opportunities for enhanced programs or building new ones. And then, of course, minimize the impacts of crime through victim restoration. And it all focuses on people that, due to whatever reason at the time, are either a priority for added service to make sure they're insulated from some of the negative impacts that can be carried.
Mental health and addictions is, as we've mentioned before, is a significant concern and priority for us. Locally, it's one of our goals to reduce the number of suicides. We are a point of contact for most people who are in crisis. That's why we're training all of our frontline officers, all of our dispatchers, all of our front desk clerks in crisis intervention training, because often they are that first point of contact in dealing with that person who's in a mental health crisis or dealing with a serious addiction issue, so that they can ensure that they identify what the problem is and we can involve the resources that can best help that person. We know that if we engage the resources needed at the earliest intervention, those people have the best chance of getting out of that hole. They have the best chance of dealing with their mental health issue. They have the best chance of dealing with their addictions issues. So it's critical for us. And we believe that through doing that, we can reduce the number of suicides. We want to create better outcomes for persons in crisis, again, connected to that networking of resources. Lessen crime, which can be attributed to addiction-related issues. We know that people who are suffering from addictions have to feed those addictions. We know that, you know, a large majority of people who are breaking into cars and stealing from cars are feeding an addiction issue. So it's important for us to be alive to those. Oftentimes we find we don't deal with an offense by itself. Often there's other issues at play. There's an assault that has a mental health component, that may have a sexual assault component, that you know, the traffic issue may be related to a drug addiction or a domestic violence incident. We know that there's layers. So it's important for us to be alive to those other areas and address them as well. And overall, we want to contribute to community awareness. It's incumbent on us as a partner in our community to make sure that we take every opportunity to help educate people, to reduce stigma with regards to mental health, for example, and to help our community understand these issues and empower them to be part of the solution.
And then moving into strategic priority number 5, I think most will be happy to hear that one of our goals is to support alignment of activities through commitment towards shared measurement, and also ensure that there are clear indicators and measurables which are communicated to our members and community. Again, another slide, which I realize is text heavy, was included more just from an infographic perspective. This is our district plan included in those different categories. So the red, again, incident response, the yellow, risk intervention, prevention, and social development. Those are the types of programs that collectively, as a district, our platoons, our criminal investigations bureau, at least a high level, have agreed to and will be working on implementing and delivering. Again, very clearly, it's indicated what our goals are going to be here locally in 2 District, but also what the key performance indicators and result indicators are going to be. That's how we're planning on measuring progress. And that's going to be applied throughout the district, so in a very consistent way.
It's amazing to see the progress in developing these. When we first started, officers and people who were engaged in it, it was easy to do the red. It was easy to figure out what we want to do for that incident response, that emergency response. You know, the risk intervention was to a degree there. The prevention and the social development were difficult for many people, but now we're at a point where everyone is looking at solving or dealing with an issue through this lens and using these levels of intervention in their solutions. This is a snapshot of crime trends that I think is pretty impressive. It relates to robbery, theft of vehicles, break-and-enters, theft from auto, break-and-enter shop, break-and-enter house, and it's a 5-year comparative of statistical analysis of occurrence counts in Oakville. And the thing that we really want to point out is the 2018 projection into year-to-date and into 2019 shows a significant decrease in these occurrences. And we don't think it's a coincidence that this is paired with the implementation of community safety and well-being locally and in the region, through the regional plan, as well as through our use of the planning framework. It shows a significant reduction that we think is indicative of the level of support that we've had in the community from our stakeholders and from other people involved to collaboratively work together to address these issues beyond a simple enforcement, law enforcement perspective.
And I think
Can I ask just a quick clarification on the graph? Is this a year-to-date compared to year-to-date similar periods in 2018, or is it?
so. It's the dotted line is year-to-date where we're at. And maybe it's easier if I just answer the question specific to where we are in those areas year-to-date as opposed to the graph. It just meant to demonstrate a 5-year decline. Not a 5-year decline, a 2-year decline since we implemented the programming. Specific to those offenses, we are, in terms of clearances and charges, we are statistically, with statistic significance, higher in all of those. The number of occurrences is lower. So for perspective, our robberies, the first quarter of 2019, we were approaching, which I'm confident will eventually be, but we were approaching a near 100% solve rate in our robberies, despite the fact that our robberies were on a decline. Our break and enters, I believe, current point in time, I do have the figures, but I don't want to shuffle through the papers. I believe we were at a 15% reduction in residential entries. That's over 2018, which is in 2018 was an improvement on 2017, and so on and so forth.
But for the same period of 4 months of the
Yes.
year or something like that? So I do recall seeing the break and enter numbers, and they were significantly lower, and that was a really nice thing to see. I think that a lot of people who saw that, particularly last night, it put their minds at ease, I think, a lot to see the change year to year. And so I was just trying to figure out if all of this was comparable periods of time, or if this was 4 months of the year in 2019 being compared to 12 months in.
They're comparable generally, and obviously we've worked fairly closely on some of the communication dashboards. But when we do when we say that there's been a reduction of 15 and 20%, that's year to date. So it's comparable over the same time frame.
Right.
At a high level currently, and certainly 2018 demonstrated that for us. But as a spoiler, we're continuing to show some of the same trends. We are experiencing less incidents, which is a good thing, and we attribute to a number of different things. And we are finding and arresting the bad guy more often, even within that. That, combined with the idea that Halton is the safest region within the last 13 years running, I believe, over 100,000. Incredibly impressive.
And thank you for the dashboards. They're very well received.
So could you just, for everybody, for anybody who might have been confused, I thought I heard you to say that your dotted lines were, you're predicting what your final result will be for 2019, or is that not what you're dotting the line at?
The dotted line is where we're moving currently. At the end of 2019, there could be a spike, but the graph itself is meant to demonstrate a statistically significant decline, which we anticipate will continue throughout the course of the year.
Okay, thank you very much. We have people who will rise to this challenge. Councillor Hazlitt Thiel.
Once again, thank you for your presentation. I have two questions. One, first of all, I should call out that the Clearview Residents Association had the privilege of having a presentation and an interactive event about 3 months ago. Sounds very similar to what Councillor Adams and Councillor Chisena had the other night. So thank you for that. And I should say thank you to the Clearview Residents Association because they took the lead. We get a question about surveillance and the surveillance laws and privacy sometimes. And I wondered if you could comment on whether or not a surveillance law is something that the regional police think is would impact your investigations. The crux of the matter is you're pointing a camera at potentially invading their privacy on their property. Do you have any comments on surveillance laws?
You mean from a police perspective, from us
Yes,
conducting surveillance?
because they're asking if why we allow cameras to be pointed in a way that perhaps may intrude their privacy on their property.
Oftentimes, the direction that we get is dictated by case law, decisions from the court that kind of point us in a different direction. Sometimes they're drastic changes, other times they're minor corrections. Typically, if something is in plain view, or it would be in plain view from any person who would be normally authorized to be in that location, or from permission of the responsible owner of that location, then it would be permitted. If it's a case of it being kind of surreptitiously placed, if it was in, say, a condo building, or if it was in a place where a general member of the public would not have access, then you would require judicial authorization to do that, to place a camera in that location.
Okay, and so for clarity, is there a benefit to the police to have some of these property cameras positioned streetwise, or does it matter?
The street is a public place, so you can put a camera there. Where you get in a conflict is if you have a camera that's directed towards someone else's, home or their bedroom or what have you.
Okay.
That's typically where it is. But I know as a property owner, a homeowner, or as a business, they can have, of course, they can have their internal video surveillance, and they can have external as well. That even points out to the road and captures activity on the roadway, because it's a public place. Anyone would have, normal and reasonable access to view that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Lischina.
Just a quick follow-up on that. Detective Sergeant Foley actually stressed yesterday, encouraged residents that if they do have a camera on their front of their house, that they actually point it slightly out to the street. So that way you can get, if someone's stealing a car, usually the getaway car is on the street and that kind of thing. So they do encourage to have the camera slightly pointed outwards.
You might want to mention how a resident's camera helped break that gang of break-and-enter artists that was driving over here from the other side of the GTA.
It has. It's proven an invaluable tool. Residential security footage is, and has been for us, one of the pillars of our investigations. Now, it doesn't, by virtue of the nature of offenses, i.e. crime tourism, it doesn't immediately result in us identifying people, but we have those pictures, and we have had direct identifications, or 3 months later, last night, for example, We're conducting an investigation, and we begin identifying the same face showing up at residential break-and-enters over the course of the last few months. So what I would explain to those residents is, of course, I can understand their concern, but the benefit far outweighs, for me anyways, any privacy issue.
Alrighty then. Councillor Elgar.
I'd just like to say one thing regarding Halton Regional Police Officer, regarding the Naxalone. I'm so happy to see that you're using it. I saw there was a big issue last night up in Milton. Could you maybe tell a little bit more about that? Because I think you actually saved a couple of people's lives last night, from what I understand.
So it's, we have had opportunity to use it. It's been distributed, and it has been done in partnership with our medical office. All of our officers, frontline and plainclothes, myself and Dave even have naloxone available for those emergency uses. It's been used a number of times. The exact number I don't have handy with me, but I could certainly get, and I can tell you that there are as many stories about frontline officers distributing it and administering it than I would be able to relate in the next 6 hours to you. But it has been a benefit. And it's a great example of not only responding to addictions from enforcement or your typical approach, but how do we prevent some of the impacts that the issues we're trying to deal with carry? How do we make better outcomes? And that's a great example of one.
Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you very much for coming, guys. It's always helpful, and thanks for everything you do in the community. I have to ask this question because I get asked this question quite frequently these days. We're having a bit of an issue with towing off of private property in Bronte area. And there's been questions raised as to the legality of the tow operator holding a vehicle off of private property. I've read that as it's a common law issue, that individual is not legally allowed to hold the vehicle until payment. And the question then arises, can citizens call the Halton Regional Police to be assisted in retrieving their vehicle?
It's a complex issue. To provide a one-size-fits-all answer to that is difficult to do because there are a number of criteria that can be set and should be set. And, the private parking lot, is it posted? Is it clearly marked and indicated that vehicles will be towed? There are a number of considerations. But my answer would be, when in doubt, call us. That's why we're here. I would never fault anybody for calling us. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to go to the tow company and demand that they return the car, because that may not be within our authority, but we're always willing to help.
Okay, because I have read in Mississauga they do that, and it is a civil matter, and if the tow operator wants to pursue the individual for those fines off of private property, that they cannot hold that vehicle. So I'm not sure if the police have a different legal opinion from that one, but.
No, it's very similar to that, but as I mentioned, our position is there are criteria that also need to be included in that property in order to afford them the ability to do that civilly. Again, clearly marked, fines established, and those types of things.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you very much for your detailed information. I think we're the better for it, and we'd like to invite you back anytime.
Thank you, Your Worship. Again, on behalf of the Halton Regional Police Service, certainly Dave, myself, and the officers that are here, I'd like to publicly thank the community for their participation, and certainly the insights that are often shared by councillors alike. If I could leave in summary, I would probably suggest two things. The first is Halton Region is doing community safety and well-being like no one else is. We are leading innovation there, and we plan on continuing that trend. I think it's obvious that we're going to do that. And the second is we've been able to take some of the learnings and some of the benefits of that and apply them here locally in a way that's consistent with what's happening regionally. So, and I accredit our ability to do that with some of the organization, community members, and leaders that support those efforts. So thank you.
Oh, Councillor Haslett-Deal.
I'm sorry, but I do need to ask this question. So you're well aware that there's an amalgamation theme that's running across the province, and you're a regional service, albeit we have your services, and we're obviously very fortunate for that. If we were to become an independent town, if you have any comments on how that would impact the services that we would be provided?
Well, thank you for that question.
You're welcome.
The,
Counselor, it's not a fair question. And the district commander is not in a position to answer it.
You can understand why we would ask the question.
of course I do.
Get the cat out of the bag.
I was going to answer that one of the things that I've learned is flexibility. Thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank you, Your Worship.
I need two counselors to move and second receipt of the information. Counselor Chisholm, Counselor Giddings, all in favor? Opposed, if any, thank you. I need two counselors to move the consideration and reading of the confirmatory bylaw. Counselor Parmer and Counselor Knoll, all in favor? Thank you, that's carried. Thank you for your time and attention and your deep interest in the subject. It's been great working with you, and we are adjourned.